Right, let's talk more about the thorny issue of US gun control now with Professor Ian Reifowitz of the State University of New York. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. President Obama sounded very frustrated after this shooting in Oregon, saying there needs to be a change in the law and also a change in the political culture. Do you think that's at all possible?
I don't want to be too pessimistic, but in a word, no. I don't think it's possible. We have a political system right now where the people who are highly motivated on the gun issue are the people who are against any form of additional gun control. Their passion is so powerful that even though the people who really would like to block just about any change are a minority, they're the ones who will vote over and over again on this issue. The Democratic Party feels itself somewhat vulnerable on the issue once it gets outside of its areas where it has large numbers of liberal voters. And so the Democratic Party doesn't want to get itself caught on the wrong side of the issue when it comes to the rural voters, and particularly rural white voters who may be lower income and whom they hope to gain as voters in their coalition going forward. But President Obama has made this personal. After he was reelected president in 2012, one of the first issues he turned to, because of the Newtown mass shootings in the elementary school, was gun control. And he was unable to get new laws passed through the Congress. And he wasn't able to do it right after he was president, right after he was reelected with all the leverage he had. I don't think he's going to be able to do it right now either.
I mean, why historically are Americans so opposed or so sensitive about gun control?
It's a great question. Like I said, I do think it is a relatively large but still minority segment of the population that feels so strongly. However, there are historic reasons for this. It goes back, you can see, to the American Revolution itself. The idea that individuals armed with their own personal weapons can play a role in overthrowing the British government, which was seen by the revolutionaries as a tyrannical government. So that is sort of in the DNA, culturally speaking, of the United States. You also have the whole frontier experience where the United States conquered by force the rest of the continent, moving west, fighting against Native Americans. And many of the individuals were doing that with their own weapons. So that idea of self-reliance and protecting oneself in an isolated, physically isolated environment is really part of the cultural DNA for a lot of Americans.
We're not even talking about banning weapons here, just tighter controls. I mean, what kind of reforms does Barack Obama want to see?
Well, the reforms that he proposed in 2013 were reforms that had the support, at least according to polling, of upwards of 90% of Americans. You're talking about reforms that would prevent mentally ill people from having the ability, making it harder for mentally ill people to get access to weapons. You're talking about closing something called the gun show loophole, which would, we already have a law that gun dealers have to do a background check when somebody buys a gun. But in so-called private sales, which often take place at gun shows, the sellers, if they're not licensed dealers themselves, don't have to conduct that kind of background check. These are really common sense reforms. That's what the president called them, and I agree with him. But you've got a lobby in the NRA, which is so powerful, and it draws on fears that relate to race, that relate to the race of the president, but that relate to fears of mobs. I mean, you don't want to know some of the things that I've read on these websites, and when I've listened to radio interviews and radio shows by some of these gun supporters, it would make your skin crawl to see some of the things that they're saying. And so it's not just about the specific proposals from the president, it's about this larger paranoia and fear, at least for some who are on that side. And it is all too often wrapped up around racism.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Fascinating to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for your insights there, Professor Ian Reifowitz of the State University of New York.